It's not an IDAMA event only. It's fortunately with all these colleagues that we are introducing. And we would touch on decentralized solar in Jordan. How do we finance it? Does it have a future for financing? How much can we progress in that? I wouldn't get into the details of the subject because my colleague and friend, Dr. Maher, who's an expert on solar energy and with profound information. And I would give more of time for our distinguished speakers. I only came to introduce you and say good luck and hope and wish you a very successful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. This is a very timely and dear topic to my heart, as Jordan is one of the leading countries in distributed solar in the MENA region. I know the report talks about several countries, but we're very proud in Jordan to have led the decentralized solar distribution systems in Jordan into a massive, and we hope to gain more grounds in the not too distant future. If you all remember, the first report was on the administrative side of the decentralized. This report talks about green access to green finance, and the third report would touch upon the technicalities, grid capacity, etc. Remind you all, this is a document that is always we would like to enhance on it, improve on it, and therefore your input would be greatly appreciated. So please feel free to share your thoughts and views with us at IDAMA and amongst our colleagues, the distinguished three organizations that have led the effort with IDAMA in drafting this report. Without further ado, I would like to call on Sarah Hepp, the Director of the Regional Climate and Energy Project in the MENA region at Frederick Herbert, to start the discussion and probably give us a highlight and an overview of the report in general. Sarah, the floor is yours, between 5 to 7 minutes to allow an ample time for the Q&A later on. Please proceed.
Thank you very much for this, this introduction, Dr. Maher. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Regional Climate and Energy Project MENA of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to the launch of our paper, Decentralized Solar in Jordan, Financing the Future. My name is Sarah Hepp, and I'm head of the FES MENA Climate and Energy Project. Yeah, as Dr. Maher already said, this paper has been accomplished in collaboration between the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, IDAMA Association, Solar Power Europe, and Finer Green. And we are very pleased to cooperate with them on this series of reports that aims at promoting decentralized solar energy through introducing recommendations and proposing solutions to the barriers hindering the development of small to medium solar projects in Jordan. The first report examined the administrative procedures in order to identify the barriers to the deployment of decentralized solar systems, as well as to provide recommendations for the improvement of the regulatory and procedural framework, aiming at contributing to maximizing socio-economic benefits of decentralized solar systems. In this event today, we will discuss decentralized solar systems by providing recommendations and proposing solutions to the obstacles that hinder the development of small and medium-sized solar energy projects in Jordan, with a specific focus on the financing and investment aspects of these projects. But why decentralized solar systems, and why do we as FES support decentralized solar systems? The focus of this cooperation is specifically for decentralized solar systems, as it has many socio-economic benefits for the people. It achieves economic savings for both citizens and businesses, and makes the most of local sources of energy and increases energy security. It creates jobs, avoids competition on land use, as many of the decentralized systems are built on rooftops. And one of the most economic, or most important benefits is that it increases also public participation in the energy transition, as people will be generating their own clean energy, and it plays also a huge role in energy democratization. Therefore, the benefits of the decentralized energy systems fit perfectly with the goals of the FES Climate and Energy Project. Because, yeah, with our regional partner organizations and environmental activists, we as FES promote the concept of international and domestic climate justice. We train our partners, civil society organizations in climate diplomacy, and bring them together with governments. We support research and policy advising in the energy and climate change sector. And we also work on local solutions for adaptation and energy efficiency on the ground. And I think with this paper that we are going to launch today, we are once again a big step closer to our goals. And all that remains for me to do at this point is to thank EDAMA, Solar Power Europe, and Finer Green for this fruitful cooperation. And yeah, and secondly, to wish us all, and especially you, dear participants in front of the screens, instructive insights and an exciting discussion today. The floor goes back to our moderator for today. Dr. Maha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, for such a clear overview. And we always look forward to our collaboration as usual. Now I want to give the floor to Raka Sarkar to talk a little bit about the report itself, the benefits of the certain experiences in certain markets like France, Vietnam, the one you cited in the report. And I believe every market has its own particulars. Every market has to be studied, what kind of obstacles to green finance and so on. So I hope that you can highlight that, Sarah, in 5 to 7 minutes in your talk. Thank you. Please proceed.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. We as Green have been honored to be participating in this paper and more than glad to be present on this webinar today. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope it is visible right now. So we will just quickly start with an introduction for Green. So we are a specific financial and strategic advisory boutique working exclusively in renewable energies. In terms of setting up, we were set up in 2013 in France, and ever since then we've had more than 2 billion euros of financial transactions and been active in more than 6 gigawatts of capacity all around the world. And we are a strong international team of more than 50 consultants and advisors in 8 different locations, as you can see on this map, covering mainly most of the important geographical areas where renewables are at its peak today. And we, of course, work with a lot of important stakeholders, and that's why we are quite close to the up and coming updates, and we are close to all our partners and clients and lenders, and we are able to give up-to-date information and be in the know-how of everything that is coming up in renewables. So in terms of financing for decentralized solar, just to quickly give an update, just to give a background on what exactly is decentralized solar. It basically refers to small to medium scale solar installations which are connected to low to medium voltage distribution on the grid. And the key being that it's located close to consumption point where it serves, as opposed to the more centralized way of power generation, the traditional way of power generation, where you would generate power in one location and transport that energy through several hundreds of kilometers through transmission and distribution lines, which of course had its own issues of losses as well as problems in infrastructure. So as Sarah mentioned, there are definitely a lot of benefits of decentralized solar, as you can read in the paper that we will be releasing soon. And most of them are related to technological benefits, benefits in terms of modularity, ease of installation, and the biggest one being socioeconomic, where it creates jobs and generates direct savings. In general, when we look at renewable energy financing, the concepts that are broadly applicable to larger projects can also be applicable to decentralized solar assets. So mainly we see it divided between the typical and the preferred way, which is the project finance mode of financing projects versus the corporate finance. Without spending too much time on this, again, there's a lot of information, valuable information being available on the report. The main advantage of project finance is that the financing is provided solely based on the asset itself, based on the project itself, without any recourse to the sponsor or the developer, which of course makes the risks to be mitigated within the premise, within the purview of the project itself. And lenders have to be very careful in their risk mitigation and due diligence so that they are comfortable with the asset that they're financing. Whereas in corporate finance, it's mostly on a balance sheet basis where the sponsor himself takes up the loan, and it's mostly his relationship with the lender and his ability to repay the loan, which gives him access to that sort of financing. And those funds can be used for installing renewable energy projects. In general, we've seen a couple of different unique models of financing decentralized solar assets. The typical ones that we see in this region and also worldwide are firstly the EPC or the CapEx model, where the user is expected to pay all the upfront costs to be able to install the solar project on, let's say, their rooftop or carports or available land, where this of course involves a huge upfront commitment from the user. And even though it's a very convenient way to get the plant installed at once, but it poses a very big burden in terms of financial capability, and not all users, especially in the given the impact of COVID, are able to handle such kind of burden. Then we have grants, which works a lot on international development organizations, I would say, where there are grants allocated to government bodies, private and public bodies, so that these grants can be utilized to construct renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects. The same could be said about subsidized loans, where directly banking sector comes into the play, and you will see this very active in Jordan as well in the later part of the presentation, where banks are able to provide loans to eligible users on flexible terms or reduce interest rates, specifically for the use of, again, in renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects, overall to boost the use of sustainability and clients to move towards a more sustainable and greener energy usage model. Next, what we see in this region is a leasing model, where the biggest advantage of this is that as a user, they do not have any upfront cost to bear for enjoying the benefits from, let's say, a solar project. The biggest advantage here is that a third party takes over the responsibility of constructing, installing, and maintaining the solar plant in return for a fixed or a different variable monthly annual leasing fee, which basically is against the solar energy that is being provided, which directly offsets the electricity bills for the user. And these electricity bill savings can be realized as soon as the plant is connected, and these savings itself can generate actually the revenue that the user is expected to pay to the third-party developer. Last but not the least, it's another method called crowdfunding, which is quite popular in Europe, US, and UK with more developed markets, where you basically try to consolidate the power of the community and a vast number of people who can each individually put in small to medium amounts of money to be able to finance a local community project or a PV project, which directly benefits the society and the community, and they all feel that they are part of the project themselves. Now, as Dr. Maher was saying, we can look at some country examples which we feel have done a good job in establishing the decentralized solar market. So we will talk about 3 different geographies. The first is UAE, which is where we are based at, and we look at projects and we talk to clients on a more regular basis. Next is Vietnam and France, where, of course, as Finnergreen, we have a lot of presence as well. In terms of the decentralized solar markets in installed capacity, UAE has done quite great, especially Dubai under the Shams Dubai program. We've got more than 150 megawatts of projects installed up to the end of 2019, which is still increasing as of today, and new projects are coming up quite regularly. The main benefits and the main drivers has been clear regulation from the government, as well as the willingness of users to start making savings and going green. So before, we used to see a lot of pushback from clients who did not really understand the benefits of solar and the implications, technical or financial, but now by and large, a lot of more people are interested in these kind of projects, and industrial and commercial users are more than happy to discuss about having solar on their premises. In terms of financing, we see that in most developing countries, when it comes to solar projects, it's mostly equity financed, but we have seen last year a lot of banks being more interested and being able to provide semi non-recourse or non-recourse project financing to a portfolio of assets once it reaches a good size. So we expect that in the future, more banks will be coming on board, and hence it improves the returns and economic metrics for a user or a developer to be able to install these plants. So, and in terms of takeaways, what we see here, of course, with these incentives, the UAE market has become quite dynamic and competitive. There is expectations of having more debt, as well as a secondary market has been created because of the activity in the last 3 to 5 years. There's more possibility of companies and sponsors buying each other's projects and be able to reshuffle their portfolio. So, that's what we see in the UAE market. On another geographical level, when you look at Vietnam, in the last year itself, it has had tremendous increase in the installed capacity of solar rooftop projects, mainly due to the feed-in tariff of a very high amount, close to 8.4 USD cents. And that has resulted in an installed capacity of almost 9.6 gigawatt, which is tremendous if you compare it to just 1 year before, where it was less than 500 megawatts. And the drivers, again, are quite similar in terms of push from the government, understanding from the client to be able to go solar, and just understanding that there is a rising demand. There is going to be need for more energy, and hence what could be the best way to decrease your bills and have cost savings, and as well as meet your sustainability goals. And again, financing, as we see similar to UAE, it's mostly equity finance, but banks are available there to be able to provide subsidized loans in terms of corporate green loans, as well as some credit lines are available, which can be accessed by, let's say, bigger off-takers or bigger clients who have preferential relationships with banks, and they are able to access these sorts of financing. And last but not least, if we talk about France, which of course is one of the most developed countries in terms of renewable energy project implementation and capacity. And the biggest drivers there as well has been the push in the European Union, of course, to develop this capacity. And that's why there have been structured tenders, which always put a certain amount of volumes in the market. And thus every year you have the certainty that there will be projects to be available to be tendered, and thus everybody knows that there will be project which is coming up, and there is no uncertainty on the likelihood of projects not happening. And that's why the market has reached maturity today, where developers, lenders, sponsors, clients, everybody is very comfortable with the idea of project financing of solar rooftop projects, not only standalone, but also on a portfolio basis, because everybody is comfortable with the regulation, the contractual structure, the technology, and absolutely there is no problems in achieving financial closure, because more than anything, banks are competing with themselves to have good assets. And it's not a question of if you will get financing, it's a question of how good conditions of financing can you get. So definitely it's a mature area in terms of that. And also we see crowdfunding coming into play, where local communities can be involved in trying to pitch in money for their community projects, which makes them feel more involved in their sustainability efforts. So in that case, I think there's a good comparison between a Middle East country, an Asian country, and a developed European country. And there's several best practices that can be adopted from these countries to see what is applicable to Jordan in its current state, in its current socioeconomic situation, as well as in its current technological maturity situation. And definitely there are things that can be taken from these countries and that can be implemented in today's scenario with Jordan to further push the decentralized solar market in this country. With that, we will end our presentation, and happy to take Q&A later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Raka, for this elaborate and oversight of the financial models available and for the experiences in those three countries. Just one point to talk about in Jordan, what we faced. Rarely you can see the beneficiary would approach the bank and go for seek for funding. It's usually the third party, as you mentioned in the report, or the developer who goes on behalf and put up the upfront capex and the whole thing, and they just have an internal PPA between the two parties, whereby they can recoup the project, or he can recoup the equipment and the land, whatever is on it, after 8 to 9 years from the as a model. And it's an internal PPA between the two parties. So this is what the model in Jordan has been for the past couple of years back, and we hope that we will grow similar to France in this endeavor. The third speaker would be Ms. Reem Al-Masri, is a policy and research specialist at IDAMA, and she leads the work on advocacy, research, and legislation. Reem, the floor is yours for 5 to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Maher. Thank you, Raka, for the comprehensive background. As you know, Jordan was one of three emerging markets for clean energy investments according to Climate Scope Index, and we ranked 6th in the 2019 thanks to the improved PV technology and the enabling market created by the government of Jordan. This success wouldn't have been possible without the access to affordable financing options. The Jordanian experience in financing utility scale projects demonstrates the effective use of complementarity between private sector development financing institution and the Jordanian governmental entities, and it demonstrates also the effective use of the needed financial instruments and mechanisms. All of these instruments and mechanisms contributed to opening up the market for investment. In this study, we focus more on small and medium scale solar PV projects, and in an attempt to draw the full landscape of the financing in renewable energy sector. To make it short, I present the study findings, and I will be speaking in Arabic. قطاع الطاقة المتجددة كما يعلم البعض إنه أو الكثير منكم وصلت الاستطاعة المركبة في عام في نهاية عام 2019 ما يقارب 1560 ميجا وات أور، وتشكل 25% من الاستطاعة المركبة في النظام الكهربائي الأردني. ثلث هذه الاستطاعة المركبة كانت من المشاريع الصغيرة والمتوسطة الحجم، بينما الثلثين ذهبوا للمشاريع كبيرة الحجم. المساهمة في الإلكتريسيتي ميكس أو في خليط الكهرباء بلغت 13% في نهاية عام 2019، ومن المتوقع أن تقفز لتصل 21% في نهاية عام 2020 وفقاً للاستراتيجية اللي تم إصدارها في عام 2019. حجم الاستثمار في سوق وقطاع الطاقة المتجددة بدأ في بداية عام 2012 عندما تم إصدار قانون الطاقة المتجددة، ومنلاحظ أنه في عام 2013 وصلنا ل 300 مليون حجم استثمار ب 300 مليون دولار أمريكي. وصلنا القمة في عام 2016 ليبلغ حجم الاستثمار 935 مليون دولار. وعدنا في عام للأسف في عام 2019 لحجم استثمار كما بدأنا في عام 2013 يبلغ 300 مليون دولار، بما مجموعه ما يقارب 4 مليارات دولار أمريكي. طبعاً سبب الهبوط في عام 2019 يعود بشكل رئيسي إلى قرار مجلس الوزراء بإيقاف مشاريع الطاقة المتجددة كبيرة الحجم. يجدر بالذكر أيضاً أنه الاستثمار الأجنبي يشكل 75% من حجم الاستثمار الكلي في قطاع الطاقة المتجددة. مشهد التمويلي في قطاع الطاقة المتجددة في الأردن شهد دخول لاعبين كثيرين، منهم الجهات الحكومية المتمثلة بوزارة الطاقة، بصندوق تشجيع الطاقة وكفاءة الطاقة جيريف، الجهات مانحة، بنوك محلية، بنوك ومؤسسات تمويل دولية. حاولنا حاولنا في هاي الدراسة نركز على أدوار كل هدول اللاعبين ونعرف حجم وتأثير كل جهة منهم. في البداية درسنا الببليك financing programs أو برامج التمويل العام، والمتمثلة ب3 برامج رئيسية: برنامج البنك المركزي، برنامج صندوق تشجيع الطاقة المتجددة وترشيد الطاقة، وبرنامج فلس الريف، وصندوق بالتعاون مع صندوق المعونة الوطنية. سريعاً لنعرف أكثر عن هاي البرامج ال3. برنامج البنك المركزي استهدف 10 قطاعات حكومية، بدأ منذ العام 2009 بمحفظة استثمارية تقدر ب1200 مليون دينار أردني. الجميل أنه كان في سقف تمويل مرتفع فيما يخص قطاع الطاقة، بلغ 4 مليون دينار أردني، ومدة سداد تصل ل10 سنين و2 فترة سماح. حتى نهاية عام 2018 بلغ 23% من قيمة هاي المحفظة الاستثمارية توجهت لقطاع الطاقة المتجددة، وبلغ حجم التمويل ما يقارب 182 مليون دينار أردني. صندوق تشجيع الطاقة المتجددة جيريف هو صندوق أنشئ بموجب قانون الطاقة المتجددة الصادر في عام 2012. هذا الصندوق له عدة برامج. واحد من هاي البرامج هو برنامج يستهدف أنظمة الطاقة المتجددة الصغيرة والمتوسطة على الأسطح. هذا البرنامج بدأ في عام 2015. حتى عام 2019 تم تركيب 13 ميجا وات ب 73% من هذه الأنظمة تم تركيبها على أسطح المباني الحكومية والمباني العامة. كلفة الدعم المقدم من قبل الصندوق بلغ 19 مليون دينار، ومجموع قيمة هذه المشاريع بلغ 50 مليون دينار حتى نهاية عام 2019. برنامج فلس الريف هو برنامج صدر مؤخراً في نهاية عام 2018 وبدأ العمل فيه في عام 2019، وهو يقوم على مبدأ أنه وزارة الطاقة تقوم بتمويل مشاريع صغيرة الحجم بحجم 2 كيلو وات ليتم تركيبها للمستفيدين من صندوق المعونة الوطنية. كان الهدف أنه يتم استهداف 7000 مستفيد سنوياً ليصلوا إلى 100,000 مستفيد في نهاية البرنامج. يذكر أنه هذا البرنامج يساهم بطريقة مباشرة في تخفيف الشرائح التي المدعومة في التعرفة الكهربائية، الشرائح اللي بتستهلك كهرباء للحد المدعوم، اللي هي يمكن إخراجها من معادلة التعرفة عن طريق تركيب أنظمة طاقة متجددة لها. هلا لتاريخ اليوم تم تركيب 5379 نظام للمنتفعين من صندوق المعونة. دور المؤسسات التمويلية التمويل الدولية في المشهد التمويلي كان متركز بشكل أساسي على المشاريع كبيرة الحجم. كان لهم دور ممتاز في تسهيل الحصول على التمويل في الفترة اللي كانت نقدر نحكي عنها حرجة آنذاك. كان في لهم دور كبير في تقديم المشورة الفنية، وكان في لهم دور في بشكل رئيسي في اللي ما سمي آنذاك بالسولر أجريجيشن، تجميع المشاريع مع بعض وتوحيد صيغة العقود ومفاوضة الحكومة والمستثمرين، التفاوض فيما بينهم. هذا الدور وتمكين الحصول على تمويل للمرحلة الأولى من مشاريع الطاقة المتجددة هو ما ساهم في فتح السوق وفي زيادة ثقة حتى المؤسسات والبنوك المحلية بقدرة الطاقة المتجددة ونجاح مشاريعها. هلا حاولنا في هذه الدراسة إنه يكون في عندنا داتابيس عن التمويل وحجمه والجهات اللي قامت فيه، وهذا المشروع لا زال يعني بنرحب في مداخلاتكم فيما يتعلق بالمشاريع ومن قام بتمويلها، عشان نفهم أكثر أدوار كل مؤسسة وما الذي جذبها للاستثمار في مشاريع معينة. دور البنوك المحلية في البداية كان دور خجول بسبب صعوبة التعاقدات فيما يتعلق بقطاع الطاقة المتجددة، وفي إنه كان موضوع جديد ومدة الإقراض كانت برضو جديدة عليهم. لكن في النهاية تمكنت بعض البنوك المحلية من تمويل مشترك لمشاريع كبيرة الحجم، قاموا بتمويل مشاريع طاقة متجددة صغيرة متوسطة الحجم عن طريق تمويل الشركات، وكانوا جزء من برنامج الملك المركزي بالإضافة إلى جزء برنامج من جيريف، برامج جيريف. يذكر أيضاً إنه البنوك المحلية حالياً تقوم بإعادة تمويل المشاريع كبيرة الحجم اللي تم تمويلها عن طريق البنوك الدولية، وصولاً إلى التوصيات اللي توصي فيها هاي الدراسة. بشكل أساسي أجمع كل المستطلعين خلال هاي الدراسة إنه وضوح التشريعات ووضوح الخطط المستقبلية هو العامل الأساسي اللي ممكن يخلي دور كل هاي المؤسسات التمويلية واضح وفعال. بشكل رئيسي المخاطر أو التحديات التي تواجه تمويل مشاريع الطاقة المتجددة هي نفس التحديات اللي بتواجه تمويل أي مشاريع، منها اللي هو التمويل بالدينار الأردني ومشكلة الفلكشويشن أو التذبذب في أسعار الفائدة. الدعم المقدم أيضاً من قبل هاي برامج التمويل العامة، ضرورة العمل على استدامة هذا الدعم، بالإضافة إلى أنه تصميم البرامج اللي بتطلع من برامج التمويل العامة يجب أن تكون بإشراك كافة المعنيين، لأنه بالنهاية المعنيين هم في الآخر رح يكونوا جزء من هذا المشروع فيما بعد، رح يكونوا هم نافذة تمويلية، رح يكونوا هم عبارة عن مطورين مشاريع، رح يكونوا شركات ستعمل على هاي البرامج، فيستحسن إدخالهم في مرحلة تصميم هاي المشاريع. إذا كان بالإمكان العمل على منصة لتجميع كل معلومات التمويل بوضوح حتى تتمكن كل الجهات من العمل بشفافية، بالإضافة إلى تسهيل الابليكيشن بروسيس أو طريقة التقدم لهاي المشاريع حتى يستطيع الفلاح البسيط حتى أستطيع أني أركب لبيتي بسهولة. يذكر أيضاً أنه الخطة الاستراتيجية الجديدة أشارت إلى طريقة جديدة لمشاريع الطاقة المتجددة ستتضمن تركيبها من خلال مجمعات من 20 إلى 50 ميجا وات. بحاجة إحنا إلى financial instruments بدها تتوجه للمرحلة القادمة اللي هي من المفترض أن تبدأ في عام 2023، بالإضافة إلى مشاريع التخزين اللي رح تكون على مستوى السمول تو ميديوم. بجوز في حالياً وقف للمشاريع على اللارج سكيل، ليش ما نشتغل على فاينانشال انسترومنتس ممكن تدعم أنظمة التخزين على المستوى الصغير والمتوسط. الريكومنديشنز أو التوصيات الموجهة للبنوك المحلية والمؤسسات التمويل الدولية تتركز بشكل أساسي على ضرورة التوجه نحو البروجكت فاينانسينج أو تمويل المشاريع، ضرورة بناء القدرات فيما يخص هذا الموضوع، لأنه المرحلة القادمة من تمويل مشاريع الطاقة المتجددة ستتركز على الانرجي بيرفورمانس بيست فاينانسينج اللي هي الأداء الطاقة وأداء كفاءة الطاقة. فحتى نصل إنه ونكون قادرين على استيعاب هاي المتغيرات الجديدة لازم إن نبلش في البروجكت فاينانسينج أكثر، وهو توصية مقدمة للبنوك المحلية وأيضا طلب من المؤسسات التمويل الدولية لتساعد البنوك المحلية في هذا التوجه. وشكرا. آسف على
Thank you, Reem, for this elaboration and this insight. And I just want to emphasize the importance of the international donors and the IFIs and the DFIs, the developmental financial institutions and the international financial institutions, because without whom we could not have reached thus far. So we really thank them. The second point, we really need to extend more facilities to the local banks so in turn they can lend to the developers or the beneficiaries in dollar, in interest rate. And the issue here, as Reem mentioned, we have an issue with the JD because of the high interest rate on the JD versus the dollar. So we really need to find a way to lend in dollars. This is really crucial and makes the project more viable. The last thing that I wanted to say about financing in Jordan, that we really need to build capacity with local banks. And here, it's incumbent on us, along with our friends and partners, the international donors, to really build capacity with the local banks so they can understand the project finance, they can understand the PP power purchase agreement, et cetera, et cetera. This is really critical to build the capacity internally so we can engage all local banks in this endeavor. Now the floor is for Matea, who represents the voice of the solar industry in Europe. Matea, the floor is yours for 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Maher. I hope you can hear me and that you can see my shared screen. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Mate Heiss. I'm head of international cooperation at Solar Power Europe, and I'm really, it's really too bad that we cannot be together in person. I remember the last time we met in mid 2019. That was the time back when we launched the first report of this series about administrative procedures. It was the start of a really good cooperation. So I would really like to thank our partners, IDAMA, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and Finer Green for this excellent cooperation, and we really hope to continue this with the third report very soon. So I've been asked to reflect a little bit upon what has been said so far, because the report has already been presented. So thank you very much, Raka and Reem, for the excellent presentation. I think we have a clear understanding of what the report is about, the different financing tools, the case studies, the Jordanian case, and the recommendations. So I will just provide some notes on that, also to stir the discussion that we will have after my presentation. But before that, let me just allow me just to briefly present Solar Power Europe. So we are the voice of the solar industry in Europe. So we are a member-led association like IDAMA. We represent more than 200 organizations across the entire solar value chain, and also neighboring segments such as storage and digitalization. We are an advocacy organization, so our aim is to make sure that solar is the leading source of energy of the future. And we have various work streams on different topics, including financing and also emerging markets. And it is part of the emerging markets work stream to cooperate with markets outside of Europe, with important and strong partners like IDAMA to promote solar and renewable energy and the energy transition in those countries, and to enable also an exchange between the European industry and the Jordanian industry. And Jordan has been really one of our most successful cooperations, and thank you for that, for the capable team of IDAMA, and also for the support of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. So just to highlight a few thoughts on the importance of financing for PV, but this is nothing new. But these are just some bullet points that I thought were important. These were also things that were alluded to by Raka and Reem. So really a feature of renewable energy financing is the financing solar energy and decentralized solar energy, including, is the high capital intensiveness. So basically the high upfront costs for solar energy, which means that there is an even bigger need for good financing instruments, for good financing support. This also means that the cost of capital has a very, very significant impact on the profitability of the project itself, and that is why we see to some extent lower levelized costs of electricity and bigger profitability in countries with less sun. So the lower the cost of financing, the better the economic context is, the more profitable solar projects are. So that is basically what explains that in Europe, solar energy in countries with less sun, solar energy can be sometimes cheaper than in countries with more sun. And so that's why we really have to work on financing. And of course, this is also related to the third bullet point, the need for long-term funding, because solar projects have a very long lifetime, and we have to make sure that the financing is appropriate for that lifetime. Although the financing is usually, of course, doesn't accompany the project throughout the 20, 30, or even longer period that we see. So I've been also asked to reflect a little bit upon how Jordan can benefit from international best practices. And Raka already highlighted a few things as well as Reem, namely for example, the importance of capacity building for Jordanian private banks, which is the third bullet point that you can see on my slide. And this is really important. And as Solar Power Europe, we're also involved in capacity building projects around the world, and so is Finer Green, by the way. And this is a really important recommendation. I just want to underline this, but this is not necessarily only the responsibility of international development finance institutions, because organizations such as the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung or GIZ, so technical cooperation organizations can contribute to this goal very much as well. So, for example, I'm aware of an initiative in Tunisia that was, I think Finer Green was involved in that as well, which involved a series of trainings for private banks to build capacities for the staff of these banks on how to do project financing for renewable energy projects. So I think this type of disseminations and awareness raising and capacity building is very important, and you don't need to mobilize a lot of funds for these types of activities. So I would really like to invite the very strong and present international cooperation community in Jordan to consider this and engage in a cooperation with Jordanian private banks. Well, in addition to that, international knowledge exchange, I think this workshop is a very good example for that. So that is why I really welcome the partnership that we have with IDAMA and the continuation of this partnership in the future. So I think that these types of platforms and fora are very important to bring European and international stakeholders together with Jordanians to enable an exchange. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A and the discussion after the presentation. Studying the cost of capital in Jordan, I think that the report that we produced is a good start, but if we want to deep dive a bit more into the cost of capital in Jordan, then it could be considered to develop a more detailed study analyzing the factors and parameters that impact the cost of capital in Jordan. And by the way, we are about to launch a similar study in Europe, which will be published later this year. We'll be happy to share this study with our Jordanian partners, and also happy to share the methodology and maybe consider doing a similar study in Jordan. Now, as regards the recommendations, and this is also something that both Raka and Reem already alluded to, but I want to put it explicitly and highlight that, of course, good financing instruments are very important. The well-designed financing instruments are really crucial, but ultimately what matters just as much, or to some extent even more, is the context in which these financing instruments are utilized. Of course, the political and economic context is very important. It's very difficult to influence this context, but the Jordanian context is really good. The regulatory framework is very important. The Jordanian regulators and policymakers have been really very committed to the cause of the energy transition. Administrative procedures are very important. The administrative procedures are there for Jordan, but as we saw in the past report, they can be further improved. So I want to refer to the previous report, and I think that streamlining and simplifying administrative procedures, and especially when it comes to small-scale decentralized projects, is really crucial. So I think that we should consider the recommendations of that report, including, for example, the simple notification, the proposed simple notification procedure for very small project, and of course the bankability of the off-taker, the utility, whoever is buying the electricity, and the available business models in general in the country. So these are my notes. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mateo, for this insight, and couldn't agree more with you on building capacity with local banks. We would appreciate any assistance or technical assistance in terms of training that you may have to be deployed locally with the local banks. It's certainly a topic of interest for all. Now I'm going to give just Reem a few minutes to talk about just the final recommendations so we can proceed to the next phase, which is the Q&A. Reem, please proceed.
في الحقيقة هو بدي أحكي أكثر عن دور الانترناشونال دونرز في المشهد التمويلي في قطاع الطاقة في الأردن. يذكر أنه برنامج اليو ان دي بي هو كان أول برنامج لتركيب أنظمة صغيرة ومتوسطة الحجم عن طريق الجمعيات المحلية، عن طريق نظام القروض الدوارة، وصندوق تشجيع الطاقة استلهم من هذا الدور برنامج الروف توبس اللي تم تطويره لاحقاً. أيضاً البرامج الدعم اللي قدمت من الجهات الكندية، بالإضافة إلى الدعم الفني المقدم من الاتحاد الأوروبي لتطوير الاستراتيجية لعام 2020-2030، والكثير من الجهات اللي هي ساهمت في تقديم دعم مباشر لصندوق دعم الطاقة المتجددة، تشجيع الطاقة المتجددة جيريف. هذا دور لا يمكن أنه نتجاوزه، لأنه كان دور مهم وتأسيسي في بداية القطاع، وهو مذكور في الدراسة. شكراً.
Thank you, Reem. And then we will take open the floor for questions and answers. Please use the Q&A button on your screen, or the button on your screen. There was one question about the panels, whether they are in conformity with international standards. Of course, this is part of the bankability. When we submit a study to the banks and the developer do submit it, both parties have obligation. The developers have to, deliver the desired energy output. And of course, the bank has to make sure that we deliver the necessary energy so they can get paid. So it's reciprocal. Definitely, this exercise, we always use panels that are in conformity or in line with the international best practices. This was one question. The second question was the energy efficiency. And especially with the EU, definitely they have really contributed a lot, and we really thank them for their efforts throughout the ministry and the JREF and with the local banks. I'm having a question on the ريم لو بس تساعديني تعالي اقعدي جنبي ولا انت مبين عندك. Excuse me, just give me a second. Ruba Zob is asking, how would innovation and technology, ICT, big data, and AI, artificial intelligence, support expedited implementation and more streamlined procedures? Any one of the panelists would like to take a stab at this? Mate or Raka or Sarah, any of you?
Which question? Sorry, Maher, Dr. Maher, if you can repeat it.
The question is, how would innovation and technology, ICT and AI, artificial intelligence, support expedited implementation and more streamlined procedures?
Yeah. Okay. So I think indeed this is a question I was eyeing with. A very good question, and I think I would like to name two aspects to this. First, and this is one of the recommendations that was proposed and presented by Reem, the implementation of a digital platform, an information platform that would enable simpler financing requests or procedures for project applications. So a central platform where everyday people, citizens, can introduce their requests and applications for projects that would facilitate and accelerate the deployment of projects very much. So that's one possibility. But when it comes to designing projects, operating and maintaining projects, digital technologies can play and are already playing a very important role when it comes to designing projects or managing companies that do the installations, and maintaining or monitoring projects. All these aspects can be facilitated by digital technologies and improved and made more efficient by digital technologies.
Another question from the good old Ruba. Any recommendation on some engineering and financial solutions for multi-story building installations? This is more technical, up your alley, Mate.
So when it comes to multi-story buildings installations, I think that's indeed a tricky question. I see the two aspects of the question. So first, let me go. Well, I think I'm not aware of the regulatory procedural administrative aspects for multi-story multi-residential buildings in Jordan. This has been a big topic that we've been tackling in Europe, and in Europe we are still facing challenges when it comes to buildings with multiple dwelling units. So first, what is needed for such buildings is a good regulation. I don't know if that exists in Jordan, but that has been a challenge in Europe. Some of the countries in Europe have proposed or even implemented regulations, but without an overwhelming success, I would say. Now, when it comes to the engineering, well, we have just published our EPC best practice guidelines for solar installations in Europe. So EPC includes engineering, procurement, and construction. So we have a dedicated chapter on engineering in the best practice guidelines. This comprises all types of installations, including utility scale, but also larger commercial, industrial, residential installations can benefit from the recommendations on engineering. And the good news is that we are planning to adapt these EPC best practice guidelines to the Jordanian context in cooperation with IDAMA and supported by the Jordanian-German Energy Partnership this year. So if you are interested, then I suggest that you get in touch with IDAMA. We are going to announce this very soon, and we are going to form a European Jordanian task force with experts who will be involved in this project this year.
Thank you, Matea. I'm going to reassure the audience that the report will be on our website shortly. So any feedback, any comments you may have that it will enrich the report, please don't hesitate to send it to us. We can include it in the report. I'm going to give this answer to my colleague, our chairman, Dr. Mahasne, on the future of energy in light of the excess energy in Jordan and the entrance of many projects. Dr. Mahasne.
Thank you, Dr. Maher. The question was about the future of renewable energy in Jordan. Unfortunately, we could do better. We in this country could do a lot better. We started a very good kickstart as of 2010 and so on. We had 2 rounds of renewable energy. Now we have frozen everything. And unfortunately, we are not looking at renewable energy from the perspective of environment. We're looking on it from short-term revenues of taxes on classical energy resources. I mean, we tax gasoline, we tax fuel, we tax electricity, and that's what the government, unfortunately, is more keen to get more revenues. Yes, we have a strategy that the Ministry of Energy did for 2020 until 2030, and we are forecasting some increase in renewable energy. I must admit, not to the level that we would wish to have. We are importing a lot of fuel, more than our needs. We have energy produced more than our needs, and thus we're thinking of even exporting energy. Making Jordan a center for energy demands that we produce local energy for its security and clean energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Duraid, for this elaboration. Another question was raised by Ihab Darwish, stating, is there any likely impact of grid connection to neighboring countries, i.e. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, etc., on renewable energy projects? Of course, the interconnection or the interstate connection between countries make the grid more robust and absorb more renewables. And hence, we can increase our renewable energy mix on the grid because of this connection and dispatchability. So yes, if we really connect, we can absorb more renewables. We can take on more renewables on the grid. I don't know if any of my colleagues, the technical Matea, if you want to, it's similar to Europe, what you have. It's most countries are interconnected, and that makes it more easier to absorb more renewables. I don't know if you have any comments, Matea, on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So increasing or strengthening the interconnections between neighboring countries can definitely help the grid and help to further increase the share of renewables and make grid integration of variable renewables easier. I don't know if I'm not sure what the current share of renewables in the Jordanian electricity mix is. Therefore, I don't know if this is already necessary. In Europe, we are at a especially some European countries, at a very relatively high share of renewables, 20, 30, even 40, 50% of variable renewables, which really makes this necessary, strengthening the interconnections necessary. So there is now a European initiative aimed at strengthening further the interconnections in Europe. So I think this could be a very interesting regional exercise also for Jordan and Jordan's neighbors to look at this in order to pave the way for a very high share of renewables in the electricity mix.
Thank you, Matea. Raka has answered one question for Mr. Zaidoun Abu Hassan. He has another one, Raka, if you would care to type in, or if you want to address his second question. I
am actually not able to locate which one he asked. I was looking for it. Could you help me with that?
I'll ask my colleague Zaidoun Abu Hassan to restate his question again. Until that time, let me take one of the questions. It says, what is your vision or your outlook on the national grid with the presence of renewable energy? Definitely, the challenges that we face is that the lack of storage. If we have more storage, the more decentralized will make the fluctuation less and less. More connections to the neighboring countries would absorb that fluctuation. So all these three elements will contribute to the more and more of renewable energy on the grid. I hope that answered that question. I don't know where Zaidoun is now with his question. If not, I'm going to ask, excuse me. Okay, there's a question from Firas Batarse on JREEF, and I agree with the studies, so on. So I guess I'm going to let the Director General of JREEF to address it, Dr. Rasmi Hamza. We are connecting him. Just give me a few minutes, allowing him to address the particular question for JREEF. All right, just give me 1 second, please. So we will take Dr. Rasmi Hamza to address some of the question that was raised by the gentleman. Rasmi, please proceed.
مساء الخير دكتور ماهر، مساء الخير دكتور دريد، يعطيكم العافية. شكرا جزيلا لإدامة وللشركاء اللي ساهموا بإعداد هاي الدراسة. أنا يعني قرأت الدراسة سطرا سطرا واستمتعت بقراءتها. الحقيقة بشكر فريدريش إيبرت على دعمها لهذه الدراسة، وللشركاء اللي شاركوا بوضع يعني الانسايتس تاعتهم فيها. كمان بشكر الشابتر عن جريف. يعني للأمانة أنا يعني كثير حبيت آلية الوصف العمل تاع الجريف، مع اني يعني مشان ما اخذ وقت كثير بالنقاش مع زملائي بإدامة، احنا وإدامة شركاء دائمين، هيك ممكن نرجع شوي على التوصيات في بعض الملاحظات البسيطة اللي ممكن أشرحها وأوضح حولها فيما إذا استمرت نفس التوصية أو بحبوا غيروها، بس للتوضيح فقط لا غير. أنا كمان مستعد إني أتواصل مع زملائنا بإدامة وأشرح أو أوضح حول بعض التوصيات ربما اللي يمكن ما فهمتها أنا منيح، أو ربما ما تكون مفهومة للبعض، لكن إحنا مستعدين إنه نحكي فيها مع زملائنا ونعطي الفيدباك تاعتنا. إذا في أي أسئلة حول جريف يعني أنا مستعد إني أجاوب عليها، وأكيد يعني الدكتور دريد بوجوده كمان هو بسد عن الجميع، لكن أيضا إذا في أي إضافة أنا بقدر أضيفها من جريف أنا جاهز.
Thank you. Thank you, Rasmi, for this interjection. I'm going to give the floor to Omar Abu Eid, our good friend from the EU delegation. Omar, if you can share with us your insights, please, on this important topic.
Dr.
Omar?
Maher, do
Yes,
you
sir.
hear me? Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I was just about to send the message, and I did. Shukran, Maher. Dr. Dureid, dear colleagues at IDAMA, thank you for giving me the floor. In fact, this is a very important study. I just wanted to ensure that it takes on board all efforts in order to have lessons learned. And not only to add what we did as EU, but in fact, we had two different experiences, a little bit more even, one through banks and one through direct collaboration through JREEF, as well as also with the Ministry of Environment and the National Energy Research Center. And in fact, these experiences were rich. The first with AFD towards two commercial banks. We actually had some competition with the central bank because they launched their initiatives at the same time. And I am sad to say that the conditions at the central bank seem to be better for commercial banks to follow rather than the initiative we launched together with AFD. So this was a clear lesson learned, really to have more synergies along the banking sector in order to support such important scheme that is more greening through renewable energy applications. And the other scheme we had with the JREEF was maybe in a different approach through solar water heaters, as well as almost 1,000 PV rooftop systems. And this was done in different modalities, but it was also another area to explore and learn from, in which we had a direct work with NGOs, and not with banks, but also this was also a fruitful cooperation and a good experience to learn from. So I believe in terms of decentralized systems penetration, this is something to build on and consider. And finally, with the Ministry of Environment and the National Energy Research Center, we actually reached out to the farmers community, notably in the Jordan Valley, where we had a very good collaboration with Water Users Association. And I would say thanks to Dr. Dureid, really, to have the opportunity to build on that since he had a good input during his work with the water sector. In fact, they were very disciplined, punctual, and we had a very good entry point to reach to such important category with such decentralized systems. We basically managed to implement around 200 something systems for farmers in the Jordan Valley and an extra 110 in the highlands. But the experience was also rich. Also, it reflects another dimension for decentralized renewables penetration. So I will do that also in writing and feed you back with our experience, but also happy to have further follow-up in mutual meetings as well. Thank you, everyone, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you for your continuous support to the renewable energy sector in Jordan. I have two questions left. I want to address a question by Mohammed Al-Attar, who works at UNDP, as talking about the Iraqi grid and so on. And if there's a lot of subsidies, how can you ensure the penetration of renewables and so on? So I just wanted to say that our humble information on the Iraqi grid, it is dysfunctional. And this is really a hurdle when you connect with the grid, so you can generate in the daytime and use the conventional electricity at nighttime. The only thing I can think of is distributed solar would solve the issue with a net metering, coupled with battery storage or hybrid systems like the diesel, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is in the interim. This is the best way to address the power outage and increase the penetration of renewable energy in Iraq at this point in time. Dr. Duraid, any comments on that, sir, on the Iraq? Okay, the last question is by our friend and colleague Khaldoon Abu Hassan, and the question is to the panelists. What is the cost of kilowatt hour in between France, Vietnam, and Jordan? Did anybody do the math on these three? Raka, Matea, Sarah, any of the panelists?
Just the cost of energy in these three countries?
Yes, yes.
Retail cost. Well, for UAE, we can tell you that the highest slab is around 44 fils, which is around, I would say, slightly less than $12 cents. I don't have the numbers for Vietnam and France offhand right now, but these two countries have some support through feed-in tariffs. So I'm guessing, of course, it's cheaper than the grid, and that's why it could make sense. But Mate, if you've got some idea of the tariffs in France currently.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, I don't have it. I don't know it by heart, but I'm just looking. I've just Googled it, and it seems that the average cost of electricity for a household in France is around 18 euro cents. That was the case in 2019, which is relatively cheap for EU standards. I don't know whether it's cheap or expensive for Jordan. But in the EU, electricity prices tend to be in general less subsidized than in some in other markets in the world. But France belongs to the EU markets where residential electricity price is low, for example, much lower than in Germany. So that's one of the reasons why solar PV for households is such a good deal for households, for families in Germany, because the residential electricity prices is really high for EU standards. And yeah, so this also relates to the question, the Iraq question. Of course, highly subsidized, very cheap grid electricity prices don't support a business model for solar PV. It's in general not so good for the national budget either. So maybe the UNDP can consider conducting a study on a possible reform of the national electricity prices and subsidy system. Also, although I know very, very well that in certain political contexts, getting rid of power subsidies is a very, very difficult topic.
Thank you very much, and I think it would be great exercise if we can do the comparative and comparative study between those countries. How much is the cost? What is the subsidies? Because it's interrelated. So I would be grateful if we can come back to us with any feedback, Matea, you may have, or Sarah, or Raka, or any of our colleagues later on, and just send us the answers back. One final question, because we need to wrap up, is that the question says, any plans for financing instruments tailored to energy storage projects that would even complement and improve the existing PV projects? Raka, the question again, any plans for financing instruments tailored to energy storage to further support and improve the existing PV projects?
Well, to this, I think, sorry, Mate, if I can just add to this, I remember a couple of years ago, there was the energy storage project, the tender in Jordan, which unfortunately ended up being cancelled. And I, at that time, had the opportunity to look at the tender documentation. And I think the key here, I would not imagine that there will be a specific sort of financing instrumentation only for storage projects, because it's a solar and storage combined. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, you're selling energy, and you just need to figure out what is the base energy amount that can be guaranteed from the combination of these systems, and whether the debt that you require can be repaid with these energy and thus the revenues. And clearly there are pricing mechanisms for, let's say, a fixed amount of storage that can be guaranteed, plus variations based on the activity and the purpose of the storage system in general. So pricing, revenue, and tariff is definitely applicable to what exactly the storage system is doing. And the key is to find a base amount which is valid for the whole life of the project, which can support this kind of debt. That being said, obviously storage increases the overall capex of the project if you add it with solar, and hence a smaller solar project, let's say, which may not meet the minimum thresholds of a bank's amount for financing, adding storage actually makes it more feasible for them to finance. So by default, we would think that a bank could be more interested in looking at these projects because the capex is higher and the ticket size makes sense for them. But the key is to basically understand the revenue structure, understand what can be guaranteed over 20 years, what can be sustained, not 20 years, over the PPA life, what can be sustained, and figure out your debt requirement based on that and have discussions with the bank. That would be our understanding.
Matea?
Yeah, if I may add a comment on this. So in Europe, when it comes to small-scale solar and storage for residential and small CNI, we see two important drivers for solar and storage. First, in Europe, we are currently we have started phasing net metering out in favor of what we call self-consumption. What we mean with this is that in future support schemes, we won't have the possibility of this virtual accountancy that is enabled by net metering, so that you can account for 100% of the electricity, even though in physical terms, most of the electricity is fed back into the grid. So what the European legislator is trying to achieve now is to increase the share of electricity that is physically consumed behind the meter. So for this, European countries are currently introducing more sophisticated schemes. Some of them are called, self-consumption, for example, or what we call net billing can also be used in order to achieve this goal, because in net billing, you can set a different fee for the produced electricity and the consumed electricity and the electricity that is fed back into the grid. So that would be an incentive. But such a move should only be considered if the share of electricity in the electricity mix has reached a higher amount, because as long as this is not the case, the net metering is a perfect scheme to support and incentivize the deployment of decentralized projects, and this should be evaluated by the Jordanian policymakers and organizations such as IDAMA, whether this is a necessary step for Jordan. So this is the first driver in Europe for small-scale solar and storage is regulation and the phasing out of net metering. And in addition to this, many European countries have started providing financial incentives, so financial subsidies, upfront subsidies for storage installations. So for solar installations with storage, because it's not that cheap yet. So consumers expect the financial support, and this has led to market to a very to significantly sharply growing market in some European countries such as Germany, which is the biggest European market for small scale solar and storage by far, but also Italy, for example. And if you would like to learn more about the European market and the drivers and incentives and regulations that can support small scale solar and storage, then I would invite you to download our European market outlook for storage, which is a recent report that we published. And by the way, as a side note, I'd also like to mention that in a cooperation project supported by the EU India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership in India, we've developed a report exactly on this topic. So this could be considered as a future topic for our cooperation with IDAMA as well.
Thank you, Matea. And I really, we are running out of time, and I know there are some questions. With your permission, I'm going to ask my colleagues, I'm going to circulate these questions to the panelists and try to get you an answer via email. What is the best means to get the answers back to the audience? By email? If we have your email, we certainly send you those questions, those answers to your questions, but we really, in the interest of time, we have to close. At the end, I would really like to thank the panelists and the organization, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the Solar Power Europe, and the Finer Green MENA team, and my colleagues at IDAMA and our chairman for taking this time to be with us today. And we really thank the panelists and the audience for their interaction and their valuable input. And please, again, if you have anything to add and to enrich to this report, please send it to us so we can incorporate it. And we look forward to the third report, which will address the technical issues hopefully soon. Thank you, guys, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Bye.
And especially thanks to the moderator of
you.
today's
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank you, Maher, for doing an excellent job. Thanks for